Welcome back into 2020 Virtual Bridge Builders Conference. It's been a great morning, but I'm telling you things are about to get even better. It's now time for our discussion around a book titled The Bottom of the Pool. And leading that discussion is going to be David Cottingham and Bishop Benton, and I'll be joining in for a little bit of conversation as well. This book is life-changing, and if you've not had an opportunity to read it or hear about it, I want to encourage you to stay tuned for this discussion and then go out and get a copy of Bottom of the Pool. At this time, I'll turn it over to David Cottingham.
Thank you, Martin. It's great for me to be here today. I just want to tell you that this time last year, I got the opportunity to come and speak at this conference, and it was life-changing for me. I came with the idea that I was going to come and speak on some financial advice based on what I do. But in my life as a believer, I know that my faith permeates everything I do, and God had a different plan. So it was last year at this time where I was reading a book, and the book is entitled From the Bottom of the Pool. And this is the book. I encourage everyone out there to get a copy of this book and read it. I promise you it's a valuable tool for you in your life. So I was reading that book, and that morning, some people would say it was by chance, but I say it was by God's providence that I was sat next to Bishop Benton, Kevin Benton, and we sat at the breakfast table together. And as I began to get to know him, as we've heard this morning, it was important to get to know people first, and I got to know who he was. And I told him earlier that at that time, I believe our spirits connected. So I don't know if we had any choice in the matter. At that point, we were formed a relationship, and so. During that conversation about what he was going to speak on and what I was going to speak on, I told him about a book that I was reading, and I recommended that he get this book. And this book, From the Bottom of the Pool, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some principles. And these principles that we've learned from this book, I want to guarantee you, I want to promise you, based on what it's done in my life, that they're life-changing. You know, Martin just mentioned it, but it's life-changing things that you can do. And I promise you, if you put these principles in practice in your life, that you will see extraordinary results. And that's what the book's about. It's thinking beyond your boundaries to achieve extraordinary results. Before we get into those principles, I just want to tell you a little bit about the author himself and how I got to the book. The author is Andy Andrews, and Andy lives in Alabama. He's from Orange Beach, Alabama. And Andy has a great story. He's a New York Times best-selling author of The Traveler's Gift and The Noticer. Andy writes really well, but he writes well based on how to relate to people because of his story, his backstory. And that backstory is important. So briefly, let me tell you that Andy, when he was a young man, within a span of a year, lost both his parents, and he found himself living under a bridge and on the beach in Orange Beach, Alabama. And during that time, when this adversity hit him as a young man, he met a gentleman that was under the bridge with him, an older African-American man who poured into his life and challenged him to go to the library and get a book and read a book on people who have made it, their biographies on how they made it. And Andy got himself out from under that bridge based on learning about other people. Well, in the later stage of that, and he came into his own being an author, he wrote a book entitled The Traveler's Gift. And in that book, The Traveler's Gift, it's a great book. I encourage you to read it as well. But that book wouldn't sell. It wouldn't sell. No one would buy it. And everyone would say, hey, it's a great book. Nobody's buying your book. So if you hear Andy's story, and he tells it much better than I do, but it came to his business manager telling him he needed some different principles to get this book sold. And finally, one day, he had a great idea. And that idea came to him when he was on a long walk. And the idea was, give your book away. So he did. Now, that didn't sound like the way to get your book to sell, but he did. He gave his book away. He gave his book away to someone, and that someone gave it to somebody else, and that someone gave it to someone else, and finally that someone gave it to a lady by the name of Robin Roberts. She read it, and she believed it, and she held it up on a Good Morning America show and told everybody to buy that book, and that book exploded into a nationwide bestseller. So most people would tell you if you give your book away, you're not going to make any money. And that's true. If you give your book away, you're not going to make any money. But that wasn't the truth. And that's part of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. So I take that book and I put it in Bishop Benton's hands. So
Yes.
Bishop, I gave that book to you. I told you what it had done in my life to change me. So I think it's important for our audience this morning to know that this is something that we both have used and we have seen the benefits from it. Before we start talking about the principles, what did it mean how that happened when I first gave you that book? What did it mean for you?
Well, first of all, I want to appreciate Alabama One inviting us to be able to come back and share. What the book did for me was transform my life in a way that really caused me to take a step back and realize that life is not found at the surface, but you've got to go much deeper if you're really going to appreciate and discover the things that I want to say God had in store for me. So the book immediately, from the first chapter, just kind of captivated my attention, caused me to realize, you know what, you're a surface person. You're a person that's living your life on the surface. But if you're really going to discover what life has for you, you're going to have to go much deeper. So for me, it caused me to really relook how I saw myself and how I interacted with the people who I would like to believe I have influence over. So I immediately took the book back to our congregation, the church that I'm grateful to serve, and I challenged our leaders to really get the book and read it, and I just believe the influence that it had on me, it would certainly have on them. So it immediately changed my life, and I want to believe that it changed a lot of the lives of the people who I'm blessed to serve. And so for me, it also caused me to really look at our connection, David. You know, when I thought about it, I thought I was just going to come to a conference like you and have a moment to share. But after you sat down at the table, and you're right, our spirits connected. And from that point forward, I realized our connection was not by chance, that this had to be some kind of divine providence, just by the way we interacted with one another. But after you told me about the book and I began to read it, I've come to realize since then that not only was our connection divinely inspired, but it was something that was going to happen for others as well.
And I think it's important about what we're doing here today. If you're watching this today, I believe it's for a purpose in your life. And I believe Alabama One is created for our community. It's a purpose here. And when you think about this for faith, and you talk about education, and you talk about community, those are three things that no matter what, we talked about generational things, but no matter what generation you're in, those three things can be built upon. And the concepts in this book can really take you to places that you would never expect you to go. Right. And what I say about that is, you know, many corporations, businesses, individuals, churches, and sports teams have benefited from the principles that we're going to go over today. And it's something that everyone watching can grasp, and it's something that it's an easy read, and the principles are easy to grasp. Wouldn't you think?
Definitely. You know, after I began reading, I wasn't much, to be honest with you, I wasn't much of a big reader. But again, the way the book is written, it makes it easy for you to kind of jump into. The author really grabs your attention from the onset, and it causes you to really look at these principles. And wow, some of the principles I was already doing but didn't realize I was doing. It was true, but it wasn't the truth. Right. And so after beginning to read, I realized, you know, this is something that can really impact more than just the faith-based community. That it can impact the lives of all of us. And I think that's why I encouraged our group of people to read it as well, because I realized it will impact their lives.
Well, both you and I and Martin himself, we're all faith-based people. We believe in that. And so we live by that we're gonna make our plans, and then God's gonna direct our steps. Absolutely. So this morning my plan was to come in and talk about the bottom of the pool, and that's what we're gonna do. But I believe as I began to listen, you know, Tim Alexander, he spoke earlier, amen? And he began to pour into the lives of all of you watching. If you didn't get to see his speech, go back and watch it on video. Everybody that has an opportunity to see what Tim said, I want you to go back and watch it after you've heard what we talk about these principles. Because the principles that we're going to talk about, God showed me that are living in Tim Alexander. Yeah. He has placed these principles in his life. He hasn't even read the book yet. Right. Give him, I think Jackie gave him a copy earlier. He's going to read it, I'm sure, after we hear talking about it. But when you can see these principles alive in the flesh. Something he said earlier, and I think it's going to get us started on our first topic. Now, Tim, I think I'm quoting you right. You said, the way you view it drives the way you do it. The way you view it drives the way you do it. You know, the Bible speaks about that, speaks about the word repent. What that means in the Greek is to change the way you think and to change the way you act. So that thought does put things into action like you're talking about. And this Bible, this book goes along with those principles of teaching that you find. And the very first thing, it's set up by the whole story of the bottom of the pool. It's a children's game that Andy and his friends played in a public pool back in the 1960s there where he grew up. And it was a children's game, and they had developed the game. The only place it was played, it was in that pool. No one else had played that game. That's where it was. It was developed right there. And they did it in a group, and the idea was to thrust themselves out of the water and see who could get out of the water the highest, like a dolphin move.
Yeah.
And there was a young man named Aaron in the group, and he was the strongest, and he was the tallest, and he had the biggest feet, of course, and he had the most thrust, and he would always win this game, the dolphin game. And when you read that story, you see it. I've been a part of things like that where we knew what the parameters were, and someone had told us what they were, and we acted within them. And so in that very first chapter, as he's giving this game out, there's a guy that comes along named Kevin, newer to the group. Kevin, just like you, like Kevin.
That's why I stayed in the book.
That's right. His name was Kevin.
He got me now.
So Kevin comes along, and Aaron has won every one of these matches every time he's thrust himself out. And Kevin comes along, and Kevin does something extraordinary. He goes higher than anyone has ever gone. And the way he did it was he didn't thrust himself up to try to reach the surface. He went down. Yeah. He went down to the bottom of the pool and thrust himself up higher than anyone had ever been. Well, immediately he thought of something outside the box. He thought of a way that no one else had ever done. And for that moment, Kevin was better than anyone. He was the best at the game. There was anybody else. He was the best. So the first concept is this. Be careful about what you think you know, because you can't always believe everything you think. Be careful about what you think you know, because you can't always believe everything you think. For example, here the thought is change your understanding and a belief about what is possible. And when Tim was speaking, I'm thinking, who would have thought that it was possible for Tim to do what he does today?
Yes.
Who would have thought that? He did. He thought that. Yeah. And he put that thought into action in his life, and that's why he does what he does today. So I see that. But when we're talking about this concept, change the way you're understanding about belief, what is possible. What's that mean, do you think, Bishop Bennett, in our everyday lives? How do you apply that to us?
For me, it has to do with culture. A lot of us, I didn't realize that my culture put limitations on me. Yes. How I was raised, where I was raised. And so if I allow my culture to put limitations on me, then I'll never be able to believe what I'm really believing about myself on the inside, because I've had these cultural limitations placed on me. And so I think when I was reading Andy's book and looking at how those young kids had developed this game in the pool, and they were all thought that the limitation was you had to dog pedal, right in place, and jump high, and that was the limitations. But one guy by the name of Kevin comes up with an idea that's self-imposed, that maybe if I go to the bottom of the pool, maybe if I do something that no one else has done, maybe if I do something that I'm inspired to do, because I believe that inspiration came from outside of himself. Right. Let me go to the bottom of the pool, do something that's different. He's not any older than the other gentleman. He's not any taller than the other gentleman. He just thinks outside the box, decides to go down to the bottom of the pool and thrust himself up, and finds out that he has done something no one else has done. And a lot of times, I'm with Mr. Alexander, sometimes when you fall into positions where you think, this is it, I've reached the capacity of what I can do, I might as well accept these limitations. Yeah. When you fall into that, you're right, life is over. When I fall into that mentality, then I feel like I've achieved all I can achieve, and so I won't pursue anything greater than that. But the book helped me to understand that the blessing is not always at the surface, but it's in those who go deeper and who are willing to believe that there is something greater than what I'm seeing in my everyday life.
When you look at the thinking and the mind changing, and Coach Wooden coached UCLA They won 7 straight national championships, and I quote this all the time on my show, and it says, "It's what you learn after you think you know it all that makes the difference."
Right.
And so as I was reading that and the kid going to the bottom of the pool, they had always, hey, this is all you can do. This is how you do it. But something made him think, what else, what other way can this game be played?
Yeah.
But one of the interesting parts of that story is the other kids got mad.
Yeah.
There was no rule that said you couldn't go to the bottom of the
Right,
pool.
right.
So he did, but the other kids got mad initially because he didn't do it the way it had always been done. And to me, that was one of the first concepts that, of takeaway from the book is, if I'm going to do it different and think different, then that means I'm probably going to do it differently than it's been done before.
And it brings me to a saying that my Uncle Bud always told me: if you always do what you always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
Yeah.
And that's and you talk about your culture. Culture does limit. Other people put limitations on us.
Yes.
But you know, one thing that can be even more dangerous than that is we put limitations on ourselves, because what? It is safer at the surface, right? It's safer for him to stay at the surface. He can breathe, right? It's light at the surface. It's easier at the surface. But he wanted to do something different, and he had to overcome the fear of going all the way to the bottom, where it was pressure,
Right.
where it was dark, where there was a chance that he might not be able to catch his breath before he came back up.
Right.
He had to overcome all that. So he had to overcome his own limitations that he placed on himself. I think that's important. We got cultural limitations, we got other people limiting us, and then we sometimes limit ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, Bishop Benton has undoubtedly this really jumped out from the book, but you've mentioned surface dweller, stayed at the surface. That was one of the principles, of course, in the book. But what does it mean? You said I was a surface dweller. I mean, you 20-year, Army retired and pastor of a church, bishop over multiple churches, but yet you're saying you're a surface dweller. So people out there going, oh, if this guy's a surface dweller, I'm looking at the success meter. He seems like he's pretty successful, but yet you're saying about yourself that you were a surface dweller. What do you mean by that?
But in everything that you mentioned that I've been able to accomplish in my life, I've always accomplished it though at the surface. If being a minister, when I minister, I found myself ministering like every other minister. And so when I'm in the military, I found myself serving like every other service member. And so I've always stayed only at the surface, never realizing that there's more to what I'm doing than perhaps what I'm doing. And the only way to find that is at the bottom of the pool. It's got to be something different than the norm of what I'm doing with my life. And so immediately, I took that concept back and I brought it to our leaders, because I didn't want the leadership that was a part of our ministry to fall into that same mindset that I found myself falling in. Because all we would do was do ministry as usual. And I'm discovering, Martin, that the reality of it is, even in this time of a pandemic, we're going to need leaders who are not surface dwellers. If we're going to make it through this pandemic, if we're going to make it through this time and this season, we've got to have people who think not just outside of the box, but way beyond the box. Because what we have faced before us, in my opinion, is something that requires leadership on a whole different level. And it requires people who understand that perhaps business as usual is just not going to be acceptable anymore. You've got to find a deeper place.
And I think it's important that we notice that this applies to everybody. Everybody watching today. If you're an individual, if you own a business, if you're an employer, if you work for someone else, if you're a sports team coach, all these principles apply to that. And if you will implement them, you can see success in many different areas by just not doing the same old thing or staying at the service like everyone else. Something you said was important there. You were successful. You were good. You've been good at what you do, successful, but you were successful in doing at the surface. That brings me to my second topic here, and it's a story that he told about Bob Beamon. I hope everybody knows who Bob Beamon is. If you don't, in the 1960s, Bob Beamon set the world record for the long jump. in one jump that he made. In that one jump, he said he went beyond anyone had ever done before.
2 feet.
But up until that time, he was a good long
Yes.
jumper. He was a really good long jumper. He had been so close to the record before. He's within a couple of inches, and he was competed at a high level. And we've heard Andy Phillips speak today. Andy competed at the highest level with the New York Yankees. You don't get much higher in baseball than that. So Bob Beamon was competing in the Olympics, so he was doing good, right? But he did so much better than that when he went and got into his changed the way he thought in his mind. And I think what happened was he got himself in a position that he was limitless. And I think he felt weightless and limitless. There was nothing holding him back.
Yeah.
And the one point that I saw in the story that he relays to that is, if you watched any of the old videos on YouTube, go back and watch it of Bob Beamon's historic jump. And I'm talking about historic jump. He jumps further than they ever have anything to measure it by. He's 2 foot beyond that's historic. They had to stop the whole contest and measure it with something else because he got so far beyond where they could measure it. But right before he's on that, he says his last jump. He didn't do too well his first 2 jumps. His last jump, right before he does it, something encouraging happens, and that is he has a friend named Ralph Boston.
Yes.
Everybody needs an encourager in their life to help speak truth into them.
Yeah.
Talked about mentors earlier.
Yeah.
You got to have someone. Tim talked about his mom. Somebody's got to come in and tell you the truth. And we're going to get to that a little bit about what the truth is. But right now, this man named Ralph Boston, if you can picture it, he puts his hands on the shoulders of Bob Beamon right before he jumps, and he whispers into his ear something. And later, Bob Beamon tells us, he whispers, hey, you're limitless, you're weightless. You run and don't worry about fouling. Give them 2 inches on the front. Just be close. Don't even try to close to the line, and you'll pick up 2 feet on the back because you will be so far above everybody else. Yeah. Quit worrying about fouling. Give them 2 inches on the front. And no one would ever want to give up 2 inches on the front of that board. You want to be right on the board, right?
Especially considering that the world record had been 13 times the average record. It had been like 2.5 inches or something. It was the typical break. So giving up 2 inches, he could fool around and jump to the record and then only tie it. So
at that moment, it would be crazy in his thinking to go back 2 inches. And Ralph Boston says, you go back, give him 2 inches on the front, and you'll get 2 feet on the back if you launch yourself that far back. Yeah. And the rest is history. He does it, and he makes it, and he gets the world record. What happens after that is also as much important to us. What happens after? He changed his thinking for that moment. He went to the bottom of the pool for that one moment.
Yes.
But guess what? He never, ever jumped that far again.
Right.
Never, ever. Why? Because the exact same things that Bishop Benton and I have talked about, and Martin talked about, began to limit him. Other people began to limit him, and other competitors began to limit him with their thinking. And the media began to limit him. We see that going on around the world. Media began to limit him because they kept saying the question. They asked the question, can Bob Beamon do it again? Well, that was the wrong question, because the thinking had to be that what? Will Bob Beamon do it again? Not can. He's already done it.
Right.
It's not can he do it. We know he can do it.
Right.
So he limited himself. And so I like the last thing that Andy Andrews said in that chapter on Bob Beamon was, the truth of the matter is the reason he didn't jump again was because Bob Beamon told Bob Beamon that Bob Beamon can't do it again. Right. And he never did. Right. We limit ourselves by the way we think. And I think this whole idea of surrounding yourself with people who are going to encourage you, we can change in those moments, but we got to keep changing. We got to keep thinking beyond the box.
Yeah, it's so true. When I read that chapter, it reminded me. I used to box. I know that's strange for a preacher. But
were you any good?
I was.
Okay.
I've seen some videos on Facebook. He's really good.
I was probably better than I thought I was at the time, but it was till later on in my life that I realized I didn't apply the principles that I knew now back when I was boxing. But the boxing, it helped me to realize you need every boxer has at least 3 people in his corner. Somebody, we talk about mentors, we talk about people who can speak into your life. If you're a fighter, you're fighting in the ring against your opponent alone when you're fighting. But you go back to that corner and you have a cut man. You have your coach who's going to come around and speak into your life. And then you have to have somebody who's going to bring you the water to refresh you. So all of us need someone in our lives. And Bob Beamon had that gentleman but he trusted his voice. It's not a matter of just having somebody. I gotta have the right person who can speak into my life, whose voice I value.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of us who don't, we have people in our lives, but we really don't value their voice. But if I value your voice because of a relationship that we've established, I've established a relationship with my coach. He comes around and convinces me that I can take this punch or that I can throw this blow. I need somebody in my life like that who really, at my moment of feeling like I've done all that I could do and I really feel like this guy's gonna beat me, he can speak into my life and change the way I'm thinking in that moment. If we don't have people like that in our lives, we might as well forget it. We're never gonna win life's battles. We're never gonna be able to be the best we can be. And then we need somebody that when I come back to my corner, he's my cut man. I come back bruised, got a cut in my face. But he can fix it in just a moment of time so that I can go back out and participate in the event again. And it's the same thing with the guy who's going to bring the water. I like to see those three people as people who I allow to speak into my life. They speak into my life. They're my mentors. They're the individuals who can instruct and teach me. And then there's that person who I need to have dialogue with. Maybe it's a best friend, or maybe it's someone who's certainly your equal. And then you need somebody who you can speak into as well. And I think if we developed what it came with Bob Beamon, I think Mr. Boston, he spoke into Bob's life in that moment, told him something that he couldn't rationalize in his mind. This doesn't make sense, but I believe you, and I trust your voice. And he went out there and jumped further than he ever jumped. It was Beamon-esque.
Beamon-esque.
Okay,
That's right.
Beamon-esque.
And two quick things. One of the things is the timing, I think, of the voice was important. It makes it sound, I haven't seen the video of when it actually happened, but it sounds as if he's about to make his approach. So he didn't have time to doubt the confidence that was placed by that statement. In other words, when the words were spoken, he was like, yes, I can do it. And boom, he went out and did it. A lot of times we'll talk ourselves out of it because the question that David referred to, can he do it again? That's what everybody said. Can he do it again? Well, duh, yes, he's done it. So I guess to our audience, is there something in your life that you've done at a high level and now you're struggling? Yeah. But you've done it. And people are going, oh man, I don't know. And now you're starting to listen, can I do it again? If you've done it before, you can do it again.
That's right.
But change the question is will, because will I do it again now motivates you to go to work.
That's right.
And so can I do it again? If you've done it before, the answer to that question is yes. Will I do it again? Could have a yes or a no, and it's determined on how you, like Tim, we were talking about Tim being will I walk again? Well, he has answered that question, yes, but not yet. Yeah. Yes, I will walk again. Right. You know, someone else can come up and say, can he walk again? Well, yes, because he's done it before. Right. Okay? Yes, you can. So to me, that one question is life-changing.
And I think that brings us to the third principle I want to go over. We touched on it a little bit, and I think I'll let you speak to this, Bishop Bedman, because I know this part kind of touched you in it. But here's the principle. And for everyone, if you'll apply this in everything you do, don't settle for great. Right. When best is waiting for you in slightly deeper water. Yes. Don't settle for great when best is waiting for you right there in slightly deeper water. You know, I know you're president of Alabama One. He wants something better for this credit union, and that's the vision that it's taken this credit union. I know where he didn't settle for great. He's wanting best. He wants to get what's best. So many people settle for great, and I know that's where you're talking about the surface builders, but in dwelling at the surface, we kind of settle for what's going on, what everybody else is doing. But here's the question here, or the statement: don't let others define or limit your possibilities. Right. There was a story that he talked about Walt Disney. Walt Disney is, everybody called the great Imagineer, right? Yeah. Walt Disney. He got fired from his first job as a cartoonist at the Kansas City Star because he didn't have any imagination. He got fired. Yes, he did. Someone else was trying to limit his possibilities. Right. So I know that was a story that touched you. Speak to that a little bit.
I thought it was funny when I was reading it that the guy got fired and goes on to become Walt Disney's billionaire because someone was trying to limit his thinking when he's sitting there drawing a mouse. I'd have probably fired him too. You're sitting there drawing a mouse, we're supposed to be doing business here, but in that moment, Walt Disney saw his future and not just his present. And the book talks about this place called, in Andy's mind, a location of contemplation. A location of contemplation, where you're contemplating a thought. And maybe you've been there. You're having this thought and you're just thinking it's a fleeting thought that's just coming in your mind and going, but there's something supernatural about this thought as well. And so when this thought comes to your mind, it's like, no, how did this thought come into my mind? Maybe it's a divine moment that you're having. And you're not just contemplating a moment, but you're thinking about something that is divinely inspiring you to not just be great. Great is great. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people settle for great because great is great. But great is not your best. And I think what I was doing was settling for great, not realizing that the best was yet to come. Right. And so when I read that particular portion of the book, I had to stop and think of all of the things that I have done that I considered to be great, but really weren't my best. And so if they weren't my best, why did I settle for great? Yeah. Why would I settle for great? Because again, my culture had taught me that great is great, but no one ever came along and said, there's something better than great. And so maybe you need to go down to the bottom of the pool and thrust up again and discover that everybody at the surface is great, but only a few of us get to really achieve our best.
Bishop, I'm gonna take this principle. I told Dave. I said I struggle with it because I'm going, whoa. I've always been driven. I want to be great. I want to, and so I struggled with how does that principle make sense? And for those of you who may be struggling with that, I give you the best example I can give is I look at you two, for example, and I know you're both great husbands. Okay, great husbands, and your wives would agree with that. And so I decide, they're my mentor. So I'm going to be a husband. So Bishop Batten does this for his wife, so I go home and do it for my wife. David does this, and I go home and do it for my wife. Well, that could be great, and it makes you the best husband for your wife. Mm-hmm. But my wife could have a totally different personality. She could care less about going to the opera or to the park and go walk. And I'm just proud, beating my chest because I'm doing what great husbands do. And my wife is miserable because what makes me the best husband for her is in that relationship and in that concept, not just emulating great people. And so if I just look at the surface of what you guys do, then I'll only emulate what you do. But if I go below the surface of what you do, you guys have found out what your wife likes. That's why you do what you do. And so if I'm going to be great, be the best husband I can be, then I need to invest in that. And that applies, this is one principle. When David told me about the book, and I want to make sure we say this is not a business book. Mm-hmm. David said, Martin, I just read a book, and I'm telling you, he said, if you don't want to be messed up, I'm not going to send it to you. I said, what kind of book is this? He said, all I'm going to tell you is that it's going to mess you up because you probably think you're a good husband. You probably think you're a good dad. And he said, but I'm telling you, when you read this book, you got every area of your life, from friend to employee to husband to wife, to dad, going to be messed up. Well, yeah. It was.
But it's good. It's good. I needed to be messed up. I needed to understand that great was not my destiny. That was not my destination. I needed to be better than that. And I think when you look at all the sports teams, we talked about the Yankees with Andy played. We're here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where Alabama is Coach Saban has a sports team. Dana Duckworth has talked about the gymnastics. What separates the great teams from the best teams is just a little bit going slightly deeper than everybody else, willing to give a little bit more to go to the bottom of the pool. That's what separates the great teams from the best teams. Because in the World Series, everybody had an opportunity to be there. Everybody had the opportunity. Some took advantage of it and were good enough. Some were great enough to make it to the World Series, but only one team was the best in the end. Yeah. And what separated them was the most likely is going to the bottom of the pool, not just at the surface.
Yeah, if I could.
Go ahead, sure. Go ahead.
There was this one portion, and I forgot to put my preacher hat on for a minute. There's this one portion of scripture that the Apostle Paul writes in Romans, the 8th chapter. He says that God makes us more than conquerors through him that loved us. And it took me, I've scratched my head on many occasions. How do you become more than a conqueror? If you're a conqueror, that would be good with me. You're a conqueror. At what point do you become more than a conqueror? Which is, conquerors are great, but when you become more than, now you have achieved the best.
That's right.
And there's a lot of us who are conquerors. We're satisfied with being great. But God didn't die for me to be great.
Amen.
He died for me to be the best. He died for me to be more than a conqueror. And so I don't settle. I push myself beyond settling just being great or being a conqueror when I've had access to be more than a conqueror.
That's right. I know we're running short on time, but there's one concept that I want to get to because I know that's one thing that knocked me and Martin and Bishop Benton for a loop. And this is the one that when I told you it's going to mess you up, it's going to mess you up. It's going to mess everybody up if you read this book. But it's really something that's important for us to understand, and that is we got to think beyond what is true.
Yeah.
Some things are true, but they're not the truth.
Yes.
Ooh, think about that.
Yeah.
And when Tim got up here and spoke today, I saw it in flesh over there.
Yes.
Because some people would try to limit Tim Alexander as to what he could do because he's in a wheelchair, because he's a paraplegic. Mm-hmm. But it's true that you are in a wheelchair, and it's true that he is a paraplegic, but it's not the truth that limits him in any possibility that he has in his life. Yeah. Although people will try to limit you, others will tell you what your limits are, and you will even try to limit yourself, as you were honest and said that you tried to do at certain times in your life. But the truth is, all things are possible.
Yes.
All things are possible. Speak to that just a bit, this concept about, and I'm gonna let Martin speak to it too, because I know it blew him out of the water. But speak to that, there's some things that are true, and we know they're true, but it's not the truth.
Yeah, it's based, for me, it's based on what we see. And so it's true, what I see it with my eyes. I can't deny it. That's true, what I see. But the truth is, what I see can often be deceptive, because I limit myself solely on what I see. When I saw you today, I saw with my eyes this individual who was in a wheelchair. And I saw him being limited. When you began to speak, it just took me to a whole different place. I realized the truth is, this is an awesome individual who really has the capabilities of doing great things, not just for his own self, but the stories you told of his life. You know, I'm imagining his football teams looking over here, he's doing push-ups, and we're over here thinking about giving up. The truth is, oftentimes we are deceived by what we see with our eyes, or perhaps even what we hear. When we hear certain things, it's true what you heard, but the truth is it's much deeper than what you've heard.
Exactly.
And so it changed my way of preaching, it changed my way of dealing with people, it changed my way of how I see life. Because everything that I see with my eyes, although it may have a limit of truth, a limit that it is true, the truth is it might be much deeper than what it is. And this is why God wants us to walk by faith and not by sight. To not live our lives governed by what we see with our natural senses, but to believe there's something much greater than that.
And I know our faith is kind of bleeding into this talk, but you know, when Proverbs says, lean not on your own understanding.
Yes.
Lean not, because our understanding is limited by what we see. And Martin, I know when I told you that things were the truth, weren't the truth, this blew your mind a bit. Tell them what you discovered when you got that concept.
Well, you know, and since we're at Alabama One, and it's a faith-based and a financial based conference, you know, I give a personal story. 5 years ago, if I walked into a financial institution and said, "Hey, I want to buy a car," and they say, "You can't." Well, in that moment, that's true, based on some decisions I'd made and my credit score and things like that. That was true that I couldn't buy a car, but it wasn't the truth. Because true is in that moment. Truth is there was things I could do to change reality and work on and improve and do, and therefore I was able to do that. And so for those of you who may be listening with us being Alabama One, listen, if you come into one of our branches and they tell you can't, that may be true in that moment, but we have resources, we have things, Jackie, financial wellness, that's all set up to change what's true into truth by helping you, get better. So, and so I always laugh that 5 years ago, that's where I was at. And today I sit here and I oversee financial wellness for the credit union. So let me tell you what was true, that I couldn't buy a car. It was true, but the truth of it is that there's more on the other side. From a church standpoint, from a finance standpoint, I've had those times, and I'm a tither. I give the first fruit and give 10 plus as God directs the plus. But the reality of it is, there was times in my life when it was hard for me to believe that 90 was more than 100. Okay. But then God reminded me, and it's a funny story. I had a wash machine break. I started tithing. I was young, and I started tithing, and my wash machine broke. And I said, "Hey, God, I'm tithing. You told me that if I do that, you'll rebuke the devourer." Well, the truth was, I couldn't afford a new wash machine. It was broke, and that I didn't have the money. And I didn't have any anointing oil either, David, but I did have some Crisco.
And you anointed it with
I
Crisco?
anointed it with Crisco. And not only did that wash machine start working, I gave it we have no idea. We're convinced that wash machine is on its way to heaven, because it went from me to another person to a college student to another college student, and that same wash machine was still working. The truth of it is, it broke down and it didn't work. The true part was that it still worked until this day. So it's just so many. This principle messed me up. Well, I'll say all the principles in this book messed me up, actually.
Can I speak to this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quickly. I decided when I got back after reading the book and getting back to our church, I wanted to test God, if you would. I know thou shalt not test the Lord. I understand. But there was a young man in our congregation. I said, if you're here today and you don't have any money, stand up. If you're here today and you just don't have any money, stand up. So the guy stands up, and I wanted him to understand the principle. I said, it's true, you don't have any money, but that's not the truth. And so I go in my pocket and I give him enough money to take him through his week. The truth is, for me in that matter was, as long as you have someone connected to you in your life, it may be true you don't have it, but the truth is you do have it. It's within your circle. It's within your capabilities to be able to receive it. And so everything that is true does not always end up being the truth. And as long as God is in my life, I like to believe that I'm more than a conqueror, and I'll never be disenfranchised like that again in my life like I once was, because of the access that I have to him. So I refuse to believe that what is true before me limits me to not tapping into the truth of the matter.
That's right. Well, there's a lot more subjects we'd like to get to, but you're going to have to read the book for that because we're running out of time. And I think we have some questions back here.
Yes.
Okay, and at this time, we'll open the floor to questions. So if anybody would like to ask David or Bishop Kevin anything, then go ahead and put it in that chat, and we will get it to them.
While we wait on the question, I just want to say, I asked myself a lot of questions, and I was over here writing it down because I got my answer today based off of this principle. And the question that I've been asking myself since October 28th, 2006, and I keep it with me in my notes, is what do you do when what you see is different than what you hear? I found out today you get to the bottom of what you see and what you hear, because what you see and what you hear may be the truth, but it's not always the truth. And so I hear a lot of things. You're going to get better. You're going to walk again. You're going to this. You're going to that. But what do you do when what you see, as you talked about, and what we see is different than what we hear? We got to get to the bottom of what we see and the bottom of what we hear. So I appreciate you all for helping me answer a question that I've been asking myself for the last 14 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
I live by this principle. It's kind of quirky, but it works for me. To do the no to until the want to comes.
Right.
There are some things I know to do that I do intellectually because I've learned this is what I'm supposed to do. But inside, I really don't want to do it. So I do it simply because I know, and I can imagine, I can never know for sure, that there's some things you do because you know I'm supposed to say this, I'm supposed to say that, but the want to is not really inside. But God is helping me to get to the place where He puts the want to, so I start doing things because I want to do it. No to comes from my intellectual awareness, want to comes from my heart. And so God wants to get it in my heart. So I start doing the things that I know to do because there's a want to Him. And I picked that up from you today, man, that where you are, you've embraced it, you've accepted it, and now your passion, you're doing what you do because you want to do it. And I'm still trying to get to that place. You bless me today.
Bishop, you clean up the way I say it. I say fake it till you make it.
Okay.
But in other words, and sometimes people hear that and they think that's negative. And that's fake it till you make it isn't me being negative. It means that I know that there's more. I'm not there yet, but I'm gonna make you think that I know it. And to Tim and to anyone else, there's a song, and Jackie and I laughed about it. The name of it is "Haven't Seen It Yet." And it talks about the darkest hour and all that. But one of the things it says, God had the solution before you knew you had the problem. So fake it till you make it. What
Till
would
the
you?
want to comes. Sorry.
The no to
No to before the
yeah,
want
that's
to
right.
comes.
That's a little cleaner than mine, but
Yeah.
I like it. Okay.
Question?
Martin, remind me what you said about I think you said it's,
What you learn.
yeah.
With Coach Woodall. Yeah. He said it's what you learn after you think you know it all that makes the difference.
I'm going to use that with my 9-year-old.
With kids, it's really good.
Well, and that's really kind of a question that I have for y'all and for Tim. I have 3 boys, 9, 6, and 18 months, but especially for my 9-year-old, he's in the 3rd grade, so he's learning multiplication. You know, he's in what I call real education at this point. And he's brilliant. He's probably smarter than he needs to be at his age. So he questions a lot of things. And so he's forming his self-esteem right now at this age. And the thing that I'm struggling with is, how do you create the opportunities to give this kind of counsel to people at that age? Because when they become teenagers, they're less receptive to it. He's at that window over the next couple of years where some of this would be meaningful to him. We're in sports, but we spend so much time learning the craft rather than, taking time out for the team building elements of it, or the perseverance or tenacity, the will to compete, that kind of thing. I find that kids his age are missing on that element of it. So I would, I guess, pose it to y'all. How do we get, because they're not getting this message in school,
Right.
and really probably not getting enough of it on their sports teams. And then when you're at home at night, you're doing homework and bath and supper and all that stuff. So there's very limited opportunities to convey these kinds of principles to, I think, our children. So that's something that's weighing on me as a dad, So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Can I tap?
You're going to take the first shot.
First of all, I appreciate the question. Sounds like you're a great father and a great dad.
I don't know about that.
The way you pitched it, it sounds like you're a great father and a great. I would say that it's going to have to come from those who we call the military first line supervisors. A dad, somebody who's going to, and I want to use myself for example, and kind of speak to our African American family as well. There's not a lot of us fathers, enough of us fathers in our homes to train up our sons to become men. And my father was not in my life at all. And every time I think about it, it frustrates me, obviously. But it calls me to be the kind of father that he never was. So I took out time, purposely, intentionally, to always be there for my sons, to be there for their activities when it came to football, sports, but to also be there to impart into them principles that I hope they would live by and grow up by and become productive citizens. So I think when I look back on them, and I have conversations with them today, they're both grown men and have their own families now. I thought they weren't listening. I thought that they were being teeny, just rejecting, that's just dad. But the reality is they are regurgitating to me the very things that I said to them that I didn't think they were listening to. So I want to encourage you to keep believing that what you're imposing and what you're imparting into your sons, they're listening. They may not let you know they're listening, but they're listening, and it'll stick with them. And have the faith to believe that what you've done in terms of being the best father you can be is the best father you can be.
And I'd just like to jump off on that. I agree with everything that Bishop Benton has said, and I think my father was not present either, but I had an Uncle Bud, and I always talk about my Uncle Bud, and this is one thing I can give you, this is a word of advice. The greatest thing that my Uncle Bud ever gave me, he gave me a lot of great things, but the greatest thing he ever gave me was his time. And I think you limited yourself by your question when you said, you know, when you get home, there's chores and things like that. Uncle Bud never allowed the cares of his day, which we worked on a farm, he never allowed the cares of his day to interfere with his time that he poured into me. He took me with him, and we fed the cows, we fed the hogs, we did everything you can talk about in a 5 or 6 hour period of time. But every moment that he shared with me, he didn't waste the opportunity to pour into me wisdom about what we were doing and why we were doing what we were doing. Today, I think too many fathers want to get to the point of the matter and get things done. Even the fathers that are present want to get things done and want to get to the bottom line, that they forget about it's the journey and what you teach them during the journey that makes the difference. I've seen, what frustrates me the most is when I see a father take over and do it themselves, because if you're going to do it right, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to teach. You have to be able to pour into children's lives today and let them make mistakes. And as our Coach Saban says, never waste a failure. My Uncle Bud never let me waste a failure. Wherever I missed the mark, he used that moment right there to teach me and instruct me. And it was in cooking supper or feeding the hogs or taking a bath, whatever it was. He put those words of wisdom in my life. And he was that person that gave me the inspiration to do what I do today. And I believe I'm an encourager because that ministry of encouragement, because of what my Uncle Bud poured into me, because he was always a voice of encouragement no matter what I did. And him giving me that time made the difference in my life.
And I'll give you 30 seconds. Nike says just do it. Life lessons. Whitney, I think we as dads sometimes or teachers or instructors, we look for set aside times. Raising your son and teaching him these principles have nothing to do with the set aside time. You do them as the opportunity presents itself. So when you wake him up in the morning and he jumps up and he runs out of his room and he gets ready to go to school and he didn't make his bed, that's a teaching moment. You teach these principles everywhere. It's amazing how we will take kids and say, hey, we can teach them the great things about sports, but we don't understand that we can teach them these same adult principles when they're third grade. So start teaching now and just do it every single time, in every moment. Every opportunity that you're spending time with your kids is an opportunity to teach them. Don't look for a set aside time.
Okay, thank you for your time today, gentlemen. That's all the questions that we have from the conference. So thank you again. We truly enjoyed it.
Thank you.